Okay, let's touch on this. Recently, I think Trump tweeted out that he plans to cut school funding if schools don't open up for in-person, learning and teaching in a month and a half, depending on where you're at in the country. Now, let's start by saying that most of the school funding doesn't come from the federal government. So we'll just, preface this whole thing with that. But let's not focus on really where the funding comes from. Let's focus on the fact that this is just only a monster would say something like this. And let's be clear as to why he is stating this. The only reason he is stating this, there's one reason he's stating this, because he knows that if schools don't open up on time and there is a problem with child care and a lot of parents either out of work and they're not obviously getting money and the unemployment benefits aren't enough to get them by. And then you have parents that are working and can't watch their kids if they're forced to stay home because schools are closed. So now you have a whole nother issue right there. And we all know childcare is outrageous in this country in terms of how much it costs. Never mind the fact that there wouldn't be enough care workers to take all these children that aren't in school. And the economy will go into a tailspin like we haven't seen, okay? And if that happens, he knows 100% for certain that his re-election bid is over. The economy will crumble just like his re-election bid will crumble. And that's all that matters to him. That's all that matters. So he will force schools open. He will force schools to have in-person learning, even if it means your kid may be put in harm's way for COVID-19. Even if it means that the spread gets wildly out of control and older teachers and administrative staff catch it and may die. Because that will happen. It's just a matter of how many, but it will happen. But none of that matters to him. All that matters to him is making sure he gets reelected. He knows that the economy is linked to his reelection, and if the economy gets destroyed because of schools not opening on time, because of how bad him and his administration have messed up this pandemic, and it's still raging stronger than ever before in this country, and no one in many of these states like Florida and Arizona, Texas, in particularly in Florida, is really doing much about it, and it's getting wildly out of control. He is going to cut funding, even though, like I said, most of the funding doesn't come from the federal government. It's the fact that he even threatened this. This is ludicrous. Let's go through it a little bit. So here's his tweet. In Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, schools are open with no problems. The Dems think it would be bad for them politically if U.S. schools open before the November election, but this is important for the children and families may cut off funding if not open. No. The Dems think it would be bad for them politically if the U.S. schools open before the November election. No, they don't. That's not what the Dems think, okay? The CDC imposed some pretty strict guidelines, and the Dems are thinking, well, we should probably listen to these guidelines, and it may save lives, and we don't want to put our children in harm's way, and we don't want to further spread the virus and further drag down the economy. And Trump knows, again, like I said, if the schools don't open, the economy will go into a death spiral. And subsequently, his re-election bid will do the same. And he's willing to threaten cutting funding, even though he probably has no idea that most of the funding for schools doesn't come from the federal government. But this is Donald Trump we're talking about. Let's continue. The tweet was the last step in an administrative-wide effort to convince schools nationwide that risk of not reopening for in-person classes outweighs the pose of the coronavirus pandemic, which has reached record levels across the country in recent weeks. Oh, I can see, here you go. The lion's share of schools funding in America comes from states and municipalities, not from the federal government. Nonetheless, the White House is exploring ways to use the next coronavirus relief bill to tie the slice of school funding that does come from Washington to the pace of different school reopenings. This is disgusting. So, in the next coronavirus relief bill, which they really should be working on now, but hell, all the senators are not in Washington at a time like this when there's a pandemic raging and you have almost 40 million people still out of work and the economy is just dragging along and people are wondering, when the beefed up pandemic on insurance is going to run out, how they're going to make ends meet, and the senators aren't there deliberating, trying to figure this out. No, they're not. Great look. They want to tie the relief bill. They want to tie some of that school funding on whether or not the schools open up on time. This is disgusting. This is just absolutely vile. Gross. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, Vice President Mike Pence confirmed that Trump administration is looking to the upcoming Phase 4 coronavirus relief bill as a potential way to exert leverage over schools as we work with. This is disgusting. So they want to exert leverage over schools on people's health, on people's lives. They want to hold them hostage based on if they can get enough funds to pay their bills and put food on the table versus their health, versus the lives of their children and everyone else who's going to come in contact with those kids when they get home from school and when they're in school. Shortly after Trump's first tweet about defunding schools, the president pivoted to attacking his own administration's health guidelines for reopening schools and calling them tough, expensive, and impractical. Yeah, this is the guy who knows about anything about whether or not the guidelines are impractical. The man doesn't know a goddamn thing about science or epidemiology or coronavirus or the spread. He doesn't know anything about anything, okay? He still doesn't understand tariffs. And this is just, I can't even begin to imagine how this plays with parents. Even parents of people who support him or are leaning towards maybe staying home or supporting him in November and voting for him. This can't sit well, even if you are a Trump supporter. I mean, I don't have children, but I'd imagine there are a lot of parents that don't feel safe, in particularly in certain states that coronavirus is just running rampant right now, and school's around the corner. They don't feel safe sending their kid to school. And can you blame them? And then the fact that the president threatens them, and then he's gonna exert leverage to withhold aid to the people that they need because the pandemic is destroying jobs and the economy. He's going to tie that to schools reopening and making them put their children in school and exposing them to the virus. Really think about this. This is just mind-blowing levels of vile, depraved, monstrous acts. Let's finish up here. But instead of laying out a plan to enable schools to meet the existing CDC guidelines, Pence said the next week the CDC will be issuing 5 new documents. These documents will include new guidelines on preparing communities for school reopenings, as well as decision-making tools for parents and caregivers, symptom screening considerations for students and teachers. Pence is slightly, he's slightly worse, or less worse than Trump. He enables him. He's a yes man. He agrees with whatever he says. The fact that you would even want to be a vice president to a man like Donald Trump is grounds enough. Okay. As the president said today, we just don't want the guidance to be too tough, Pence told reporters. It's not up to you whether you want the guidance to be too tough. It's up to the scientists and the people who understand the virus and how to curtail it, because apparently you don't. No one in his administration does. They didn't listen to the experts all the way through, and it's still, they've just moved on. They don't hold pressers anymore or briefings, and they don't discuss things with Fauci, and they don't have the coronavirus task force team. It's just, people are dying still day in and day out. States are running out of ICU beds in their hospitals, and these guys are worried about the restrictions being too tough to save people's lives. They really should be worried about is getting people the funds they need so that they can stay home and we can social distance and we can follow these guidelines and wear masks and do what we need to do to curb this pandemic as soon as possible so the economy can come back as soon as possible. This is a zero-sum game. I've said it multiple times. You can't have a healthy populace while you have a healthy economy right now. It's one or the other. And the longer the pandemic rages on and the weaker our guidelines are and restrictions and haphazard plans that we throw at it, the longer the economy is going to continue to drag, the longer people are going to be out of work. It's not that hard to understand, even for just the layperson, but it seems to be extremely hard for them to understand, coupled with the fact that they know what it means. It means they lose power. It means he's gone. And that's what we have to do come November. We have to make sure he's gone, November 3rd. Get out there and vote this monster out of office. Anyway, if you made it this far, like, comment, share, upvote, downvote, whatever floats your boat.